Hey friends, welcome to Flite Test Tech. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be building the Nano Flerken and also the FT Millennium Flerken. Now both these Flerkens build exactly the same and they both have very unique purposes. Our Nano Flerken is sub 250 grams. It flies off a 2 or 3 cell 850 milliamp battery and it flies off of a 1304 motor. Now the big brother of the Nano Flerken is going to be the Millennium Flerken. The Millennium Flerken is designed for speed. The key difference between the Millennium Flerken and the Nano Flerken is the Millennium Flerken is going to have a wooden spar that's going to be running through the wings. This is going to give it extra reinforcement for those extra speeds and high force loads it's going to experience. And included in our speed build kit with the Millennium Flerken is also an additional poster board for your wingtips. This is going to help cut on drag and give you that extra bit of speed. Now for a great experience, both the Nano Flerken and the Millennium Flerken have a great power add-on option where you can basically add your motor, your speed control, your servos, and anything else that you're going to need minus the aura or receiver and battery. Now for this build video, we're going to be showing you how to basically build both the Nano Flerken and the Millennium Flerken. The Nano Flerken is going to be the airframe that we focus on the most, but anytime that we have a special step for the Millennium Flerken, you're going to see a special border like right here. Another main difference between the Nano Flerken and the Millennium Flerken is that no paper will be peeled on the Millennium Flerken at all. So friends, if you're ready to start building with me, let's go ahead and get our materials in order and we'll get started. Now to start our build with the Nano Flerken, the first pieces we're going to start with is going to be the main body and also the wings, the top surface of the wings, and our spars. Let's go ahead and pop those pieces out now. Now that we have all the main pieces popped out for our Nano Flerken wing, let's go ahead and go over which each one is. We have our main body, we have our top surfaces of our wings and our elevons, we have our main spars, and we have our two servos with the servo arms already attached and cut to size. Make sure before you move on to the next step that you have your two servos ready to go because they're going to be going into this plane very soon. Now that we've identified all the pieces, first thing we're going to do is put a seam of glue right along the score cut and use a scrap piece of foam to wipe off any excess. Now for the Millennium Flerken, we're going to do the exact same process as the Nano Flerken, except our score cut is going to be running laterally across the trailing edge. Now that we have our seam glued, we're going to do a single bevel cut on the leading edge of the bottom and the top surfaces of the wings. The easiest way to do a single bevel cut is to hold the blade around a 45-degree angle and gently pull towards you while making sure your blade is just above the paper. Easy way with this model to get the other side is to simply fold in 180 degrees and carefully finish off the other side. We're going to want these bevel cuts to be pretty deep because the tightness of the airfoil on the Nano Flerken is quite significant. So even if you have to go over a couple more times, that's just fine. And same process on the other side. And we're going to do the same process on the other side of the wings. Again, we're making sure that we're doing a single bevel cut towards the inside of the wing, so we're not cutting through the outer surface of the paper here. Now that we have our bevel cuts done, we're going to remove the paper on two portions of the inside of the wing here. The first portion is going to be this leading edge. We're going to skip the area that has the spar, and the second portion is going to be down by the trailing edge. I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to hold it right over this area right here because I don't want the paper to peel down into the lower portion of the wing that's exposed. So I'll just take it right off of the seam right here and pull it up at a 45. Same process on the other side. We'll skip the spar area. We want to keep that strength. And then right where it meets here, we'll just pull up at a 45. Now we're going to carefully overlap our foam on the bottom surface of the wing. Be careful because we have the bevel cuts not to exaggerate how much this overlaps. Just meet the very edge of the paper to the other side of the edge of the paper like you see here. And the easiest way to tape this is I simply like to take one side down, lift it up, place the piece where I want it to be. Once we're happy, roll the other side down. Then we'll simply flip it over and cut off any excess. Let's do the exact same process now on the other side. Quick test fit. Make sure we're happy with everything. That looks wonderful. And once again, we'll just slightly overlap. Again, we're not going to push the paper too far in there. We want that bevel cut to meet right at the paper. and then gently push it down. And cut off the excess. Now that we have both the top and bottom surface of our wing joined here, it's okay for it to overlap in the back. Let's install our spars. Now with the Millennium Flerken, it's going to be the same process, except you're going to see that the spar is slightly skinnier than the two score lines. Basically, the foam spar gives us the ability to glue and mount the wooden spar. We're going to make sure that we line up the Millennium Flerken spars with the etch lines that both go next to where the servo hole is and also parallel to the score cut. Now you're going to see that there's a sharper angle on one side than the other. The angle that's closer to 90 is going to go up against our servo hole, and then the more acute angle is going to go on the outer surface like you see here. Once everything lines up, you take a bead of glue right down the center. It doesn't have to be too much. And then glue our spar into place. Same process on the other side. We're going to line up our spars, making sure that the tip of the spar lines up with the tip of the wing, and then also the same angle is on the servo hole side. A little bead of glue right down the middle. Then just a little wiggle back and forth, spreading that nice and thin, and then we'll let it dry. Now that we have our spars in place, let's go ahead and install our servos. Now for the Millennium Flerken, our installation process is basically going to be the exact same. The only major difference is we're going to be using our FT 9-gram servo, our single servo arm, and the biggest difference is we're going to do a score cut on both sides of the servo flange located farthest away from the servo arm, and then we're going to crack it off. This is going to give us the clearance we need for the spar to be able to run through properly. The first thing we want to do with our servos is remove the stickers if they're on there on both sides. And also remove any extra oily residue that you may have with either alcohol wipe or paper towel. If you haven't already installed your servo arms and pre-centered your servos, you definitely want to make sure that you've done so, because once these are glued in place, you're not going to be able to access your servo. We've removed the stickers on our servos. The next thing we're going to do is either take a piece of sandpaper or the edge of a razor blade and just give a couple gentle scratches right on the housing of your servo. What that's going to do is give you the ability to have the glue grip into your servo casing a little bit better. Just like everything, we're going to always do a test fit before we glue anything down. And for this servo, we're going to line this up here so that the servo arm is roughly in the center and that the servo arm faces closer to the edge of the paper on this side than the middle. We want the push rod basically to be able to go right down, go on the outside, hook in, and then the excess to be able to go down into the foam itself. Once we test fit it, apply a bead of glue on the bottom of the case and then slide it back into position, making sure that the glue is not too thick. Squeeze it down nice and firm and hold it in place and let it thoroughly dry. Now that our servos are installed for the Millennium Flerken, now would be a fantastic point to install our wooden spars. You're going to notice a tiny little notch right at the point where the spars bend. This notch is going to point up against the foam and also mark exactly where the inner portion of the wing is. So we'll do a quick test fit. We'll line up our little notch. You're going to notice that our spar gives us the ability to glue it not only on the bottom of the wing surface, but also against the spar itself. And then it'll hold against and then trace along our score cut line. Once we're happy with the fit, I'm just going to go ahead and put a bead of glue right up against the spar and let it spill over just a little bit on the bottom. And then I'll also follow with a little bit of glue on the top surface of the wing. Same process as before. Mark this down. There we go. Do the same process on the other side. And kind of just flip this over. Do our quick test fit. Nice healthy bead of glue right down the spar. A little bit right there. Line up our marks and press it down. Now, one key point to point out of a difference between the Millennium Flerken and the Nano Flerken is the additional score line of the Millennium Flerken. This is just to give us a softer roll of the wing. What we want to make sure that we don't do is allow this bevel cut here to be higher than the main surface of our wing. We should see that the score cut should be lower and we should have a nice smooth airfoil. And now's the time when we come to test fit here. What we're going to want to do is use our fingers and our thumb to gently give a little bit of an airfoil curve right over the area where the spar is. Now you're going to notice that the servo is higher on this side than it is on the wing tips, and that's exactly how we want it, so the airfoil has a nice increasing shape here. Once we've kind of given it its shape, let's bring it and fold it 180 degrees right around. And I'm going to let this hang over the edge of the table here And what we should see is if we did the bevel cuts right, this edge and this edge should line up right along with our score line, and our wingtips and our elevon hinge line should line up right on the wingtip there. If you're not able to get that angle too easily, it's not a problem. All you simply need to do is possibly remove just a little bit more material on your leading edge, opening up that bevel a little bit more and letting it fold over. Now to lock in the shape of our wing, I'm going to put a thin bead of glue on both sides of my score cut, and I'm going to repeat the exact same process that we just did. So I'm just going to put a bead of glue right on the score line here, very thin one, and also on the other side. Then we're going to come right back around. I'm going to push it down into place, and I'm going to hold it there. And let that glue thoroughly dry, making sure that we seal it in the shape of the wing. You're going to see after about 30 seconds when we open this, the wing has a nice airfoiled shape to it. Now that we're happy with the way everything looks, let's make sure we have plenty of glue on our hot glue gun. We're going to apply a bead of glue on the leading edge, the spar, and also on the trailing edge on the back surface here. Make sure that you put the trailing edge bead of glue just a couple millimeters in so it doesn't actually squeeze over and seal up your elevon hinge line. You can always cut that loose if you have to later on. So we'll put our first bead of glue right on the leading edge, second bead of glue on the spar, and the final bead of glue right on the trailing edge here. Fold around one final time here. Just gonna pull that in just a little bit. And I'm gonna let the elevons kind of hang over the back of the table here just so I don't wrinkle it up accidentally. And I'm gonna put the flats of my hands right over the spar and let my thumbs rest on the trailing edge and hold the whole piece down. Give this a good minute or so to fully dry before you move on to the next step. So if we did everything properly, what you're gonna see is you're gonna see that these two edges are nice and flush. You're also gonna see that your elevon hinge is right at the very edge of your trailing edge of the bottom surface of your wing. If everything looks good, let's move on to the same process on the other side. All right, same step as before here. We're gonna remove the sticker of our servos and scratch up the surface here. Quick test fit. That looks great. Place a nice bead of glue right on the bottom of the servo and press it into place and hold it down. Now with our thumbs and forefingers, we'll just give a gentle curve right over the area where the spar is, helping to establish that airfoil, and we'll come down for a quick test fit. It's looking pretty good. And now we can lock down our airfoil with a thin bead of glue on both sides of the spars. Now that we have our airfoil shape and we're happy with the way everything looks, let's go ahead and go back one final time, and we'll place a bead of glue right down the leading edge on the back side of our spar. You can even do a little bit on our servo if we want, and also along our trailing edge. One final time. Again, the areas that we're looking for is this back surface here, our hinge line, and we'll hold it down. Now our Nano Flerken wings are pretty much done, and we're ready for the next step, which is top of the fuselage. But before we do that, for the Millennium Flerken, we're going to establish our dihedral in a different way. Because we have these spars, all we simply need to do is put a bead of glue underneath each side and tilt them up and glue them down. Now one thing we want to do for extra strength is fold this open 180 degrees, put a heavy bead of glue on this portion here, and then we can go ahead and just press this down, and the wing will naturally rise to the proper angle. It's also important as we press these down to make sure that these land basically across and parallel from each other. If one's a little bit different than the other one, just bend it into place and hold it there for at least a minute and a half until everything is fully cured. Once one side is done, we're going to do the exact same process on the other side. Now at this point, our main section of the wings and the body are now done. We're ready to start assembling the very top of the body of the Nano Flerken. Now that we got the main section of our wings and our center body done, we're going to be putting our attention towards the top rear portion of the body of the Nano Flerken, and also all the other formers and the pieces that go with it. The main pieces we're going to need in this build are going to be the top rear cap. This is what you're going to see the most of on your airplane. The lower supports for that, your front nose, and also this little angle gauge right here made out of foam. This is also going to be used for your dihedral gauge, and you'll see how that works in just a second. Along with that, you're also going to want to locate the pieces that you see here that are included in your plywood kit or your short kit. Let's go ahead and put our main attention towards this, and then we'll start addressing all the other pieces. Now, just like our wing section, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to apply a bead of glue, starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from the center here, right in the center section. Use a scrap piece of foam and wipe off any extra that you may have. Now that our center section is dry, let's go ahead and remove these 2 pieces of foam right here that are going to allow us to do our foldovers. If you ever have any extra foam, you can simply deepen your squirt cut and use the edge of your razor blade to scrape off any residual foam you may have. These 3 areas here are going to be our foldover areas. This is basically going to seal the area off so it has a nice finish edge. Easy way to do this is to apply a bead of glue and then go to the edge of the table and fold it over. Or if you have a steel ruler, or even better, a big chisel, you can use that cold metal and simply fold it over and hold it that way. That's exactly what I'm going to do here. I'm going to put a very, very thin bead of glue, just about 1/16 of an inch thick. Then we use this ruler here and we're going to fold it up 90 degrees. Once we're there, I'm just going to simply pull that towards me and it releases nice and clean. Same process on the other 3 sides. Just a nice thin bead of glue. And then one more. Now before we do our bevel cuts or remove the paper, the next step we're going to want to do is you're going to notice that there's 2 dots here and here. I'm just going to go right along those dots here, use my ruler, cut from one dot to the other. Make sure that when you cut this, that's cut completely through from dot to dot, even on the top surface here. Now that we've cut our center line where the hatch is going to go, we're going to put our attention towards single and bevel cuts on the rest of this piece here. Now we're going to have certain areas that are going to have single bevel cuts. That's going to be favoring these outer portions here and here. And we'll also have double bevel cuts along the outer perimeter here and here. Let's go ahead and do that right now. Now that we have all of our bevel cuts cut, let's remove all the paper on this rear top section. Using the tip of a screwdriver or a pen or pencil, lightly press down on the hinge line on the back louvers. This is going to make it a little bit easier for you to raise the louvers up and glue them into place without it resisting too much. Once you've done that, you can use the tip of your finger and just kind of hold in and just raise this louver up ever so gently, about the thickness of a piece of foam. Basically, I push in until I see the top surface of the foam lining up with the bottom surface of the inside of the foam. Once you're happy with that, apply a very thin bead of glue and hold it in place till it dries. We're going to do this process on every one of these 6 louvers. Now this rear section is done, we're going to put our attention towards the clasp that's going to attach our front hatch to the main body here. The 3 pieces we're going to need is going to be our main hatch clip, our hatch latch, and our button. We're going to use a little bit of instant zap glue, and we're going to glue our button into place. I'm just going to put a drop right down on each side. I really enjoy using medium thickness zap, works really well. A little spray of kicker, it's going to make this job dry even quicker. And we'll put a drop on the other side. The first piece in our hatch mechanism that we're going to be putting down is going to be the rear piece, and this is going to help us line up the front piece. We're going to line up these 2 short pieces right along with that cut that we did between the 2 dots. Once we're happy with that, we'll put a bead of glue, focusing most of it on that wide open surface, and just carefully on the outer edges here. If you have any Zap Foam Safe CA, you can also glue this down that way as well too. We're just going to hold that down into place. Next, we're going to be doing a test fit of our hatch. Now we want this button to come down right through the slot that's cut into our body here. And the reason is when we push this, this is going to raise up just like you see here. Once you've done a test fit and everything looks good, we're really going to focus the majority of the glue on this back section here. You don't want to put any glue on the center section ahead of these 2 dots, and you want to be careful not to accidentally glue any of these seams down where your hatch isn't going to work as well. So I'm going to put a nice healthy amount of glue here, give just a very little bit on the outer edges. right down into place. And I like to try to center it up as best I can, making sure this clasp looks just like you see here. That looks great. When we flip this over, you'll see that all you're gonna see for the top hatch is this little tiny button. When you press that in, that mechanism is gonna release and your nose is gonna slide off very easily. Now's the time where we're gonna take our little gauge here. If we take this to the edge of the table and line this up, letting our little button kind of hang over the table, we're gonna be able to fit this up just where this pushes in, and you're gonna notice that this is vertical now with this gauge, and then we have the proper angle established for the top center section of our fuselage. Once we're happy with the way that fits, we're gonna apply a bead of glue on both sections. Now take your time and make sure that you avoid putting any glue close to the dot here or the cut here. So that means we're gonna start and stop our bead of glue right here, jump over about 1/4 inch, go to the edge, little dot right here, and then on the back. Right back to the edge of the table. And we're gonna hold this down. The most important thing while this dries is making sure this bottom surface is firmly against the table and that this piece here has a gauge up against it and it's vertical. And once this is fully dried, you'll see that you can remove the gauge and nothing moves. Let's do the exact same process now on the other side. Okay, we're just gonna take this up to the edge of the table, right up against the button. That looks good. And we'll focus all the glue, making sure we avoid the 2 center dots by at least 1/4 inch, making sure that no glue goes over there. Back on the table. Back on the table, and we'll let this dry for about a minute. Now that we have our main center section done, we're gonna place this flat on the table and we'll be able to establish the angles that we're gonna glue into place by simply folding it over, matching up and making all the surfaces flush and pressing it against the table itself. So just like before, once we practice the move, we'll fill the gaps with a bead of glue, folding it over, matching up and making all the surfaces flush and pressing it against the table itself. Again, make sure we don't flatten this out, just simply let this rest against the table. If everything looks good, let's move on to the same process on the other side. The rear piece of our body is now done. Let's put this aside. We'll bring the main section of our wing in and we'll start putting on these formers. Now for the Millennium Flerken and the Nano Flerken, the process for our top former is the exact same. The only main difference is you're gonna be notching out where the spar is gonna intersect with our top former. This is gonna give you the ability to put glue around that and lock it in even better. Like everything else, we always start with a quick test fit. Make sure we're happy with the way that looks. There's one. There's two, that looks great. And we'll go ahead and carefully glue these in. Just a thin bead of glue right on the flat portions. You don't need to worry about the tab. It's really important making sure that the raised section is going towards the front of the nose and the tapered section is going towards the rear of the tail. There's one. There's two. If you have any excess glue on the inside, now would be a really good time to remove that or scrape it off with a scrap piece of foam. The firewall is going to be sitting down in there and you don't want any extra glue globs to change the angle that the motor is at. Let's go ahead and give this nose a quick test fit. We'll just keep this bottom surface slightly underneath the front nose here and push it back so it nests together nicely. Once we're happy with that, we can come back with a nice thin bead of glue. Favoring that mostly towards the upper portion of the foam. Slide that into place and then press it down in. And I can remove any excess foam if I need. So we don't accidentally glue our servo leads where we don't want them. We're gonna poke them through the center section like you see here. Now that we have our wires routed, we're gonna line up the very front of this hatch cover with the very tips of the notches that you see here. Lay this right over top and we'll press down into place. That looks good. And as we lay this down, we'll see that the very back corners here line up perfectly here. And when we press this into place, that this is parallel to this bottom piece here. Now don't feel like you gotta cover up this whole back piece. This is also meant for the rear motor cover to rest on. This is probably one of the most important steps in the whole entire build because we don't accidentally want to glue this hatch or a portion of it that's going to need to be later removed. Right from where this seam line is on both sides here, and also from where these 2 dots are from the back side, that is going to be the area that you're going to be gluing. You don't want to put any glue on the forward sections here or here. So the easiest way to make sure that we don't accidentally put any glue where it doesn't belong is by putting it on this hatch and then placing the hatch down and holding it into place. So let's go ahead and do that now. We have plenty of glue in our hot glue gun. I'm first going to focus my glue, and again, starting and stopping at least a 1/4 inch from the edge. I'm putting a fairly healthy bead of glue. Giving us plenty of time to let it dry. Oh, let's get this side as well too. Now we can come down, we're going to repeat the exact same movement that we did before. Find the edge right there, press that down into place. And then we're going to bring our 2 portions of the rear part of our cover, again making sure that it's nice and flush on both sides, and it is. And we're going to hold this down and give it at least a minute to fully dry. Good time now before the glue fully dries, just to kind of pull our leads through, make sure they line up with the little holes there, and they're plenty far forward. Now that we have this rear portion of the body attached, we're going to next address our dihedral. Dihedral is going to be crucial to give us great stabilization, and it's also really cool looking. We're going to use our little gauge that we used before on this hatch, but this time we're going to be turning it around and using it for our wingtips. Now, if your wing doesn't easily raise up to allow this to easily glide under, just simply open up your groove here and then crush this down just a little bit where it's going to be beaten up with the body. But if you did everything along with me, what you'll see is it just barely touches, nice and easy. Let's go ahead and check the fit on both sides. That's perfect. And I like to line my dihedral gauge up just with this score line right here. Now I cannot stress this enough. It is incredibly important we put plenty of glue on the center seam and also where it meets the body here. If it's not strong enough, the first time you have a bad crash, this wing could rip off. So we want to make sure we have a really good glue joint. To do that, we're going to open this up about 180 degrees, just like you see here. I'm going to put a very healthy bead of glue right along this score cut. And then also on this main portion of the body that's going to be meeting the wing. Now we can raise this up, hold this down, and I can use a little scrap piece of foam if I want and wipe off any excess. Give this plenty of time to fully dry before doing your next wing. After about a minute, you're going to notice that if you pull this away, that the wingtip doesn't drop. Let's now do the exact same process on the other side. We're going to open this up 180 degrees. We're going to focus the majority of our glue right along this full hinge line here, and also on the portion of the wing that touches the body. Press this down into place, and we'll give it another minute to dry. While this is drying, I'm going to go ahead and locate a few other pieces here that are going to finish off our wing and our body connections. It's going to be these long triangle pieces here, and also the inner web between our wing and our body. To fill in the gap that we see right here, we're going to be using these 2 pieces. Now you're going to notice if these are put in backwards, the angle of the top is not going to match the angle of the bottom. So we'll simply rotate this around, and if we did everything right, what we should see is that this piece will fit in really nicely right along here. Once we test fitted that, we'll carefully remove it, and we'll apply a nice healthy bead of glue on both sides. This is also a very important structural piece, so you want to make sure you have a really good fit when you slide this in. Slide that all the way in, and I'll just use my finger, lightly press that down into place. And it's okay if it just passes just a little bit past the bottom piece. Every piece is going to be just a little bit different depending on how much you push it in. And we'll do that on the other side. Again, we're just gonna match up the angle. That looks good. Healthy bead of glue on both sides. And we'll slide it into place. Don't need this anymore, I'll just scrape off any extra glue we have. Make sure it doesn't build up too much because this is the area that our fin's gonna go up against. Once we have these pieces in, come back with your bead of glue and put a nice bead of glue right on both sides and then wipe off the extra. While that's drying, we can put our attention towards these front pieces. This little tiny piece that you see here is nothing more than a fold over, and we know how to do that. We'll just remove the extra foam. Quick practice. And a bead of glue, and my new favorite tool, the ruler, to fold it over, and then we'll fold it over one more time. You'll notice that one side here is slightly longer, and that's so it matches up perfectly to cover up the exposed foam like you see here. If you do it too short, you'll see just a little portion of that foam is still going to be exposed. So we're going to want to glue this piece in just like that. Now this is also a structural piece too. This kind of gives us a radius to take any kind of stress load from an impact away from that corner where it meets. So just like before, we're going to put a nice healthy bead of glue on both sides and then press it into place. Make sure in the process of doing this, you don't accidentally glue the front hatch that you see here into that. And same process on the other side. Remove the extra foam and a bead of glue, and then we'll fold it over one more time. Quick practice. We're gonna put a nice healthy bead of glue on both sides and then press it into place. Now that we have both of our fillet pieces done, we're gonna add one final step of reinforcement, and that's gonna be on the very bottom. We're gonna marry both these sides together in all their pieces with a single piece of tape, running right along, and then we're gonna roll it around this front fillet piece, marrying the wing, the center body, and everything else together. And then on the top side, I'm just gonna do a relief cut here, and I'm gonna come straight out. We'll remove that excess. Now I can fold this around. We'll press it up against the body. And we'll trim off the excess. Let's do the same process now on the other side. There we go. Now what we have is a much stronger joint here, and this is going to be more of a radiused or filleted area where all the load's not going to go right to this point here. We're now done with the top rear body section. We also have our wings mounted and the dihedral established. Our next step in the video is to put our attention towards the nose and the bottom piece. Let's go and get those pieces down. So in this video, we're going to have these main components that you see here. We're going to have our front nose, our bottom rail guides, and also the rear section of our main body. So the first thing that we're going to work to get out of our way is we're going to go ahead and condition these two pieces here and do our single and our double bevel cuts here. Before I do anything, the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and do our foldovers. That way when we cut our bevel cuts, we can cut the edge of those foldovers as well too, and we'll end up with a nice clean edge. Very thin bead of glue. And the same process on this back edge. The center section that you see right here is not something that we're going to want to do a fold over for. We're going to leave that alone. That's going to help us align to the top of our back plate. Now that we've done our foldovers, your two pieces should look just like what you see here. We have the foldovers on this outer edge, we've left the center section alone, and we've also done the foldovers on the rear bottom plate as well. Now that we have our foldovers done, let's go ahead and do all of our single bevels first. I always like to just go ahead and do a quick score cut over the areas that I'm gonna do my single bevels, just to make sure that we have no resistance. Whenever you do a score cut, make sure that the tip of your blade doesn't come down and cut through the bottom surface of your paper. All right, we'll do our first 2 bevel cuts here on the main center section. And we'll do our single bevel cuts on our rear piece. And we'll continue these single bevel cuts all the way around this back perimeter. Now that we have all of our single bevels cut, feel free to pause your video and make sure that your pieces look just like what you see here. You're gonna see that the single bevels on the front nose favor towards the outside. And then also on the rear section, we have the same thing. We have the single bevels on the center section favoring towards the outside, but then we also go along this outer perimeter around here and also on the 2 edges here. Once you have all of your single bevels cut, we can move on to the next step, which is cutting our double bevels. All right. Let's go ahead and finish this piece off here, and we'll do all of our bevel cuts, which is basically all these score lines that you see right here. Feel free to pause your video and make sure that all your double bevels look just like what you see here. In the center section here, we have 2 single bevels, and all the rest of these are double bevels. Now we don't need to do anything more on this front piece here, so we can put this aside. But this rear piece here, we're gonna give it the similar treatment that we did on the top section of our body just a moment ago. We're gonna peel all the foam that we have here, and we're also gonna raise these louvers. This time, the pivot point for these louvers are gonna be on the opposite side though. And just like we did before, put a light little score line right at the back louvers here. And using the fingers, just pressing up here, we can raise them up about the width of a piece of foam and glue them in place. The rear section of our body is now done. We can go ahead and put this aside. Make sure that you don't peel any of the inside foam from the front nose. We want not only the reinforcement and strength, but also the weight to all be up in the front of the nose. We're gonna go ahead and put those 2 pieces aside. We're gonna put our attention towards these 2 formers here. We're gonna place the 2 formers and just give it a quick test fit. Notice this time the formers are facing towards the front of the nose. Let's go ahead and glue these in place here. Put a little bit healthier bead of glue on the bottom here, just because that's going to be hitting the ground more often, and we don't have to worry about anything else fitting inside of that. There's one. We're making sure these are nice and perpendicular to that surface there. And healthy bead of glue. And there's 2. Now, if you'd like to add a little bit of strength, especially since this area is going to be taking lots of impacts when you land, you can go back with a nice thin bead of glue right on both sides. We're going to let this dry nice and solid because we don't want this to move when we flip it over. Now that we have the bottom section on, we're going to put our attention towards this top section. Now we are going to go joint by joint here and be very methodical. If you follow along with me, you're going to get a great custom fitting nose to the center section that you see here. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a practice fit. We're going to line up these 2 score lines on this side and this side exactly. Once you've done that, you'll feel when you push this down where the whole nose naturally rests, just like what you see here. Make sure that when you let these pieces rest, that the front nose is parallel to the bottom plate, just like this. Once you're happy with the way everything looks, we're going to apply a bead of glue right on both these sides, and we're going to start and stop just about 1/4 inch from the edge. Now we're going to go right back to our piece and repeat the exact same process. Notice that we haven't glued anything down to the main body here. And while I'm holding this in place, I just want to again make sure this is nice and parallel. Before we join this piece to the main body, this is our last opportunity to check to make sure that none of these areas here are accidentally glued to the body. Once we glue our nose on, we're going to cut these pieces down through here, and that's going to allow us to release this whole front nose as a hatch. What you can do here, if you need to check, is you can take a razor blade and make sure that you can go back to the dots on all these sides. And the same thing up here. Good. Now that we're happy with the fit, I'm going to apply a bead of glue, making sure I stay away from the center section here. Right on the edge. One in the center. Again, I'm avoiding right where those creases are. I can come back and reinforce it later. And now we can lay that piece over one final time, press it into place. And what I like to do is have most of the tension back on my top finger here, pulling it in alignment, and that should give us the proper slope of our nose. Once we've given this a good minute and we move our finger, you're gonna see that this joins on really nice and strong. And now that we have this piece done, we can fold this around. And what we can check for is to make sure that all of our pieces kind of wrap around nice and neat, and that we also have symmetry. In other words, that the angles here, here, and on the top are all pretty much the same. Once we're happy with the way everything looks, one seam at a time, we're gonna go ahead and put glue on these two seams. We'll fold it up. And when we get close to here, we're gonna be really careful not to accidentally glue this together. So oftentimes what I'll do is I'll skip that seam, go to these upper sections, and when we pop this off, we can come back in and fill that in with glue. So let's go ahead and do these two seams now. Just like everything else, I like to start and stop a 1/4 inch from the edge. And we'll fold that up into place. And every time we do that, we want to bring this back in and join it up just like it's a complete piece to get the proper angle. We're going to give this about 30 seconds and then we'll repeat that process again. And these two seams here, we can either put a very thin piece of glue or we can come back later here. I'll go ahead and just put a really thin piece of glue, just enough to kind of give that seam some strength, but not so much that's going to squeeze out. And again, back right down again, making sure we're not gluing anything together. Yep, we're good. Again, we're looking for symmetry, making sure everything has the same angle. And again, right down on both sides here. And again, we're going to put a thin bead of glue, making sure we don't have too much squeeze out and accidentally glue this to our main body. And then also, we're going to put a healthy bead of glue on this seam here. This last joint that we have here, we're gonna give this plenty of time to fully dry because we don't want this to pull apart. And there we go. To add a little bit of reinforcement, I'm gonna take a piece of 2-inch tape and wrap it around the back edge and then cut it flush with the front. Now the main nose section's done, we're going to flip the Flerken over on its back and we're going to position this bottom plate here. And before we cut this nose loose, we can get a nice precision fit simply by laying this up against this edge, just like this. This is your opportunity to just do a quick test fit, make sure that all your bevel cuts are deep enough that they fully seat down nice and clean against the lower portion of the body. If any of these aren't deep enough or fit properly, you can always cut and trim a little bit to make sure that it meets nice and flush. We're going to do this section right here in one shot, and then we'll go ahead and go back on this back section and then glue that down. So now that we've test fitted this, we're going to start and stop our glue, again a 1/4 inch from the edge, all the way around. And we're also going to place a bead of glue on both portions that you see here. And we'll take it right down again. Bead it right up against that nose piece. and we're gonna hold it here for about 30 seconds. Now that this section's glued firmly, let's just do a practice fit. And what I like to do is I like to kind of pinch this down more than normal and let it shingle under the piece of paper. And that way you get a nice streamlined flow from the front to the back. Once we're happy with that, we can lift it up 180 degrees. We'll place our glue right down in the seams here, the single bevel here, and then all the way around the perimeter. A little pinch and push it down on the back edge, and we'll hold it down in place. All right, so our rear section's now done. We can now flip this over on the top end. And the easiest way I've done this before is I take my razor blade or a ruler and I connect one dot to the other. So here's my one dot, here's my next dot. And what I'll do is I'll just kind of press down and rock back and forth, and that gives me the line that I need to cut. We're gonna go from dot to dot to dot on both sides, and then we're gonna carefully pull forward. And if we did everything right, when we press this button down, the whole nose is gonna come off. And now hopefully, with just a little tug, the whole piece comes off for you. Now the great thing about this clasp is when we push this in, it doesn't go anywhere. Now would be a really great time if we need to do any kind of reinforcement. You can go back in and you can use a scrap piece of foam and lay a little bit more glue in. This is actually incredibly solid just the way it is, so I don't need to worry about it one bit. Now that we have these two pieces separate, you can come back with a little bit of glue and smear it on these open edges on all these surfaces and let them dry separately. That's going to keep the paper from delaminating and also give you a nice smooth surface. Now that the main nose section and the bottom of the Nano Flerken are done, we're ready to move on to our next step, and that's going to be the fins. Now the prep for the Nano Flerken and the Millennium Flerken's fins are pretty much the same, although they look a little different. Keep in mind the foldovers for the Millennium Flerken are going to be on the top part of the fin, where you will have on the Nano Flerken a foldover on the front leading edge and also on the bottom plate. All these foldovers will be glued in the exact way. The three main pieces we're going to need for the rear tail and the rear cover is going to be our two fins and also the rear motor cover. Let's go ahead and start by removing the foam from the areas that we need, and then feel free to pause the video to make sure your pieces look just like mine. Now that we have all the foam removed from the areas that we need, feel free to pause the video and make sure your pieces look just like this before we move on to the next step. Now, instead of just simply doing our foldovers like we typically do with most of our pieces, we are going to prepare a couple of these pieces and also leave some of the foldovers for later. Mainly on these fins here, we're going to do this foldover after we glue them in place, so that way it covers up the seam on the very bottom. It's going to give us a more finished look, and it's going to also add a little bit of strength. Also, on this rear and motor cover, we're going to bevel the inside edges before we fold this over, and that's going to give us a nice seated finish right down into the back of our body here. So let's go ahead and put our attention towards that first. So we're going to fold this over 180 degrees, kind of get the paper out of the way for us, and then we're going to cut a very slight bevel cut. We're looking to match the angle of the rear part of our body of our Nano Flerken. Once you have that, we'll take our steel ruler again. I've really enjoyed using that. We'll put a bead of glue right down on the paper, a real thin one there. Fold it over, fold it flat. Same process on the other side. Thin bead of glue. Fold it over and fold it flat. Then finally, the front and the back. Now you can see when we drop this piece in, we have a beautiful flush surface on both sides. Now that we have our rear hatch in, we're going to glue this little wooden tab that's included with our kit, or our short kit, onto the leading edge. Both these sides are the exact same, so you don't have to worry about what side you put it on. Our little hatch is now done. Let's go ahead and put our attention towards our fins. As I said earlier in the video, we're not going to worry about the fold over on this bottom edge. We're simply going to do the fold over on the leading edge. Thin bead of glue all the way down. And we'll take our ruler and fold it up 90 degrees. Same process on the other side. Now that we have the leading edge of our fin folded over, we're going to do a quick test fit here, and you're going to see that the notch here will fit between the back portion and the trailing edge of our wing. What I like to do is, because this piece can kind of drift forward or backwards, I like to line up the trailing edge of our wing only and make sure that we only go down the one thickness of the foam. Now for gluing on the Millennium Flerken's version of their fins, they're going to be at an angle like you see here. We have this little tiny angle gauge, and on the angle gauge we have a small arrow. This arrow is going to point up and it's going to give us the proper angle that we need to use to mount our fins. An easy way to prep our fin is, as this kicks out, we're just going to take our razor blade. We're not going to cut a bevel cut. We're just going to drag it along and kind of crush down a slight angle. We're going to do this on the very front side, just like you see here. This is going to give us the ability, as we mount the fin, to be able to hit this angle and have as much glue joint as possible. Once we're happy with the angle, we're going to put some glue on the bottom of the joint. We're going to mount it onto our airplane, and after that's fully dried, we're going to go back with our glue gun on all three sides and make sure we have a heavy bead of glue locking in our tail surface. Once you're happy with the way everything fits, I'm going to put a healthy bead of glue on the surface that's going on the top of the wing, and then a healthy bead of glue on the area that's going to go against the side of the wing. Then repeat that same motion again. And we're just going to make sure that we keep the fin perpendicular right along this seam, which will keep it true as an angle, and then perpendicular to the surface of the wing. That looks great. Once we've given this plenty of time to dry, I'm just going to cut a little tiny relief here just so it doesn't fight me there. I'm going to put a healthy bead of glue on the bottom surface of this paper. I'm going to use my ruler to fold this over. And that paper is going to seal it on the very bottom edge of the wing and give us a tremendous amount of strength. Let's do the exact same process now on the other side. We always make sure that we do a quick test fit. We're going to line up the back of the tab with the very trailing edge of the wing. That looks good, and of course we want to make sure it's perpendicular to the bottom surface of the wing. Once we're happy with that, apply a nice healthy bead of glue right on the bottom and on the side of the tab. Bring it back down into place. And before we press it fully down, we're just going to make sure that the bottom surface here is flush with the bottom. And it is. Once we've confirmed everything is perpendicular, we're going to let it dry. And just like the other side, we're just going to cut a little relief here. And we'll place a bead of glue right down over the paper. And you can use the table as your friend, or a ruler, or even a razor blade. Now that we have our fins on, let's go ahead and put our attention towards our two elevons. We're going to make sure that when we adjust our elevons, that both the elevons have just a little bit of reflex in them, basically about the width of the piece of foam. So once we cut these out, we're going to move up the elevons where the bottom surface is going to line up with the top surface here. First thing we want to do is take our razor blade and we're going to cut right along the score line, making sure we don't go through the paper. And then we're going to cut all the way through our etch line. Once we've done that, we should be able to carefully rotate this up almost 180 degrees, but keep in mind it is going to hit the top surface of the wing. Now we can carefully cut a bevel cut through our elevons. Just a little bit more. There we go. And if we want to keep this area from dragging, a real easy way to open up space is to take your push rod and to go back and forth a couple times between the elevon and the main body. Once we're happy with the movement and there's no resistance when we move the elevons up and down, we're going to go ahead and open this up, take a scrap piece of foam, and do a hot glue reinforcement hinge. To do a hot glue reinforcement hinge, we're going to take the nozzle of our hot glue gun, we're going to place it right over the seam where the foam and the paper meet, and put a very, very thin bead of glue down. Once we've done that, we're going to come back and we're going to scrape off all the extra, pushing the hot glue into the foam and the paper and removing any extra that we don't want to have accidentally bind up our hinge. After we do our hot glue hinge, we're just going to confirm that we have no resistance on moving. If you do feel any resistance, most likely what you have is a glue glob that's been developed between the paper and the foam right at the hinge line. Just go ahead and remove that with a knife. And let's do the same process now on the other side. Just like before, we're going to cut down through the hinge line and then all the way through our score cut. Now we can carefully cut a bevel cut through our elevons. And just like before, once we've confirmed that everything's moving nice, then bead a glue right where the hinge and the paper meet and scrape off any extra. Now that we have both of our hinges cut and our elevons, our next step is to install the push rods and the control horns. We're going to locate our control horns, which are going to be right here. And you may notice here on our control horns that the holes are just slightly higher than a normal mini control horn. We remove this up just to give us a little bit less throw because this plane does not need much throw at all to have great control. Now if you're using your stock control horns, you can always go in your radio and dial it back just a little bit. Included in our kit is going to be this length of push rod here. And with our push rod, we're going to install it into our servo arm, going to the hole that's just above the foam. The servo hole we choose for the Millennium Flerken is going to be based on your skills. If you're new into the hobby or basically want a very smooth flight experience, go to the second inward from the outermost hole on the servo arm. If you're an advanced pilot and you want crazy roll rate, you can go all the way out, but keep in mind, if you're a beginner, this is going to be quite touchy to fly. And as we mentioned before here, we're going to put just a little bit of reflex into this airplane. Basically, we're going to bring up the bottom surface of the wing up one length of foam to line up with the top surface of the wing like you see here. Now that I see where my reflex needs to be, I'm just going to mark that with my fingernail. Now I'm going to grip it with my pliers. I'm going to bend it towards the wingtip. You can go ahead and put linkage stoppers and everything in there, but I find that it's not really a needed thing, especially when you have so many extra lengths of wire. You can do this a couple different times if you're not happy with it. This is what we call a modified Z-bend. You can make it a standard Z-bend, but first out, before I do that, I want to just test fit it and make sure everything looks good. You can see now with my push rod made that the reflex is just one length of foam like you see here. Now that I'm happy with things, I'm going to grab this, I'm going to bend it 90 degrees, making a conventional Z-bend. I'm going to reinstall my control horn. And now I can glue it in place. If at any point you're concerned that maybe your servo moved during installation, now would be the time to recenter your servos and just confirm that. You can always trim it out later, but it's just a little bit of extra work. And we're going to do the same process now on the other side. First, we're going to do a Z-bend on the extra length of wire. We're going to pass it through the hole of the servo arm. Holding the reflex that we need in our elevon, we're going to mark the push rod where it needs to bend through the control horn, making sure the control horn hole lines up directly over the hinge. And then we can bend our Z-bend and install our control horn permanently. Now that we have our servos installed, we're going to put our attention towards the motor mount. The pieces that we're going to need for the motor mount are right here. We have our two sides, our motor mount plate and our top plate, and then our rear hold down. Let's go ahead and first put these together. You're going to see that there's a notch on the very top here. That's for the motor wire to be able to pass through and go along the side and inside the fuselage. Let's go ahead and take some zap and glue it in place. Now that our motor mount's glued in place, we're going to go ahead and grab our motor. Now the motor we're using here is going to be our 1304 Gremlin motor. This is a fantastic, efficient motor. It's not going to give you ballistic speeds, but what it will give you is great performance and a really incredible flight time. If you don't want to have to solder anything, you can get our value bundle. That's going to give you your motor, your ESC, your servos, and everything else you need minus your receiver and your battery. We only need to attach this with 2 screws. I'm just going to pass one through, and I'm going to mount this making sure that our wires are favoring towards the notch right here. Just line up one, just start it getting threaded, and then we'll do the other one. If you want to use a little bit of blue Loctite, feel free to do so just to keep everything in place. It's also really important that you make sure you only select the screws that are just long enough to grip it without passing through into the windings. And before we drop our motor in, we're going to go ahead and just press in our little tiny hatch hold down and then glue it in place with a drop of glue. Before we glue our motor in, let's go ahead and just do a quick test fit. The motor's going to slide down between the 2 plates of the fuselage until the bottom catch rests up against the main body. And you're also going to want to make sure that the angle of the rear formers line up exactly with the firewall. That looks really good. Let's go ahead and remove it. Now I'm going to focus my glue just mainly on the two sides right here and on the very bottom. As we press this in place, it's just going to smear right down, and that looks great. Now this motor will work with either our 18 amp ESC that's included in our value bundle, or if you have extra 20 amp FT ESCs for either our A or Power Pack Fs, you can use that as well. Now that our motor's installed, we're going to install our ESC. It doesn't really matter if our motor's spinning backwards. If it is spinning backwards, all we need to do is replace any 2 of the 3 bullets and swap them. I like my ESC to be going down towards the bottom, so I'm just going to pass it through this passage hole here and pull it through. Now I can pull my ESC wire right up to the front. Now this plane definitely needs all the nose weight it can get, so I'm just going to glue my ESC down just ahead of the CG, making sure I leave plenty of room for the lead to plug into my FT Aura 5. That'll be right about here. Just a little drop of glue is all you need. And there we go. You can always move your electronics to get the proper center of gravity. Once you put this together, you can move things around. For this, I'm going to be flying it off of a 2-cell because I like FPV cruising. Now this plane does fly phenomenal with no flight assist whatsoever, but what I do love to do is teach people how to fly and pass the transmitter no matter what the skill set. The FT Aura 5 is a great solution to not only take out the effects of the wind, but it also gives us features like launch assist and level assist, which makes the experience even better, especially if you're flying FPV. But feel free to use your own receiver if you don't wish to use the FT Aura 5. To install the FT Aura 5, I'm just going to go ahead and press down with the pins facing towards the motor. And I just want to make a little tiny indent in the foam. I'm going to cut through that foam and remove that rectangle. You can 3D print a mount, you can use double stick tape. What I like doing is just putting a couple little drops of hot glue right on the very end, but you do need to make sure that your Aura board is nice and level. There we go. Once we remove that little piece of foam, just going to put a drop of glue on each corner and then press it in place. It's really important that the Aura board is mounted level and also that the pins are facing towards the back. On the Aura board, you're going to see a signal, a positive, and a ground wire, and you're also going to see S1 through S5. Making sure we line up our signal with our signal wires, we're going to plug our ESC into S1. We're then going to locate our left elevon, which is right here. We're going to plug that into S2. And then finally, we're going to take our right elevon and plug that into S3. It's really important to make sure that all your signal wires are lined up to your signal pin and also in alignment with each other. Just to keep everything neat and tidy, I'm going to mount my lemon receiver on the very bottom and then move my antennas to optimize them at 90 degrees from each other. So at this point, our FT Aura 5 is hooked up the way we want it. Throttle in 1, left elevon in 2, and right elevon in number 3. In the past, when we set up our radios, oftentimes we use Spectrum. We want to showcase all the cool new features with Radio Master because our community loves it and so do we. So in this video, we're also going to be showing you how to bind and how to set up your Radio Master to work with an FT Aura 5. The first thing we want to do is we want to bind it. So that's what we're going to do right now. Now before we bind this, we're first going to set up our radio, and typically with Spectrum we are changing our throws. We really don't need to worry about that on the Radio Master, but what we do need to do is reverse our aileron and our rudder. That's because when we push our aileron to the right and our rudder to the right, the PWM goes in the wrong direction. So let's go ahead and do that first. So we're going to hold down on our model button to enter into our settings, and then we're going to hit the page button until we go all the way over to outputs. Once we're on outputs, you can see we're already defaulted to aileron. I'm going to press the scrolly ball once. I'm going to roll all the way over here where it says direction right there. We're going to press it and we're going to reverse it. Now I can hit back one or return once. I'm going to scroll down to the rudder. I'm going to press it again. I'm going to scroll over the direction and I'm going to reverse that as well too. Now I can hit return 2 times and I'm back out of the screen. I'm going to go ahead and bring in our Spectrum radio here, and I'm going to turn that on monitor mode, and I'm going to show you why we did what we did. To kind of show you what I'm doing here, I put both these radios in monitor. When you see now, after I reverse the radio master's aileron and my rudder, when I push the spectrum to the left, you should see the PWM go down. Now when I push the aileron to the left, you'll also see that PWM go down. That's exactly what we want. Let's confirm that now with the other one. When we push both rudders to the left, we should see them PWM go down, and that's exactly what we have. This basically gives the OR the right information, whether it's from the spectrum or the radio master. At this point, we're ready to go on to our next step, which is binding. Now that we have both our rudder and our aileron reversed, let's go ahead and go to our next step, and that's binding. We're going to hold down on our model button, enter into model mode, and then I'm just going to go reverse just to go to the bottom portion, all the way up. Here you see mode, we're going to select multi, we have DSM, and for this we're going to have X2F. That's the newer version of X. Once we're happy with that, we're going to scroll until we see bind. We can now hold the bind button down on our FT OR 5, that's the top one right here, and plug it in. Once we've done that, you'll see if we look down our 11 receiver that is flashing orange. And we can now select this button by pressing down the rolly ball and make sure you move it at least 4 or 5 feet away. There we go. We're just going to give it a quick minute to initialize, and there it is. Now it's really important once you've bound this, whether it's Spectrum or Radio Master, to do a power cycle. We're going to go ahead and do that right now. So I'm going to power down my airplane, and I'm also going to reset my transmitter. Transmitters always come on first.
Welcome to OpenTX.
And now we're going to go ahead and plug in our battery. All right, at this point you're going to see that we're going to have control. We have ailerons and we have throttle, but we do not have elevator, and that's for a good reason here. We need to put this in elevator mode. We do not want to make any additional changes to our Radio Master. Everything we're doing is going to now be done through our FT OR 5. I'm just going to switch my channel 5 switch so we don't hear the gyros chirping while I work with it. And to enter into our elevon mode, we're going to use what we call quick set. Quick set mode is entered by pressing down on the bind and the trim button at the same time. We'll just take our finger, we're going to press down both buttons for about 6 seconds until that light turns green. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. There we go. Now that light's green, you're going to see that we can actually activate the gyros, but when I go on my pitch, nothing happens. It's because we're still in normal mode. We're now going to enter into elevon mode, and to do that, all we need to do is hold down on the trim button only until this LED turns red. So we're going to hold that down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Light went red, and controls are going to cycle. Now that we're in elevon mode, you're going to see that we now have our elevon control, and we need to address the servo direction and possibly even the gyro direction. The way we're going to test our gyros is we're going to go ahead and rotate this past 45 degrees, and when we do that, you're going to see the gyro react, whether it's good or bad. In this case, we want the gyros always to steer our plane back to level. You can see by the direction here that it's not the case. It's going to make it roll more to the right. To reverse that, I'm going to hold my right stick all the way to the right for about 7 seconds until it reverses. Now you can see that my gyros are right and the directions of my controls are right. Let's go ahead and check the direction of our elevons. You can see when I pitch the nose forward, it gives me more down input, and that's exactly what I don't want. And also when I pull back on the stick, my elevator's backwards as well. So we're going to reverse both the gyro and the servo direction by holding back on the elevator stick for about 6 or 7 seconds. There we go. Now when I pitch my nose down, I have up input. When I lift my nose up, I have down input, and my roll is bringing me back to center in both directions. Also, my controls both on my elevons for aileron control or bank control and for pitch control are perfect. There's one last thing that we're going to do, and it's really useful whether you're a new pilot or if you want to fly FPV and have the plane automatically level out just to enjoy the moment a little bit more, and that's called level assist mode. To enter into level assist mode, we're going to hold down on the bind button for 6 seconds while we're in quick set mode. You're going to see the light change. There's the blue. We'll let go of it. You'll see 2 pulses, and we're now in level assist mode. We've done all the changes we need to do now on our controller and also on the plane. We're ready to exit out of quick set mode, and to exit out of quick set mode, we're simply going to hold down on the bind and the trim button once again until we see the status lights change. So here I'm holding on bind and trim together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll release. Rapid blue light means it's rebooting. Perfect. Just like any time we've done lots of different changes to the control board, let's do one more power cycle. And we'll plug this back in. You can now see my controls work beautifully. Channel 5 is already programmed to switch SA, which is a 3-position switch, and that's what we want. You can see right now we have no gyro control. When we move our switch to the middle, we're gonna have level assist, which means when we tilt this one way or the other or pitch up and down, it's always gonna reverse us to level. And then when we go all the way forward, that's gonna be acro, and that's gonna take out the effects of the wind. The last thing we want to check before powering this down is to make sure that the motor's running in the right direction for the prop that we have. Now, whether it's clockwise or counterclockwise, it does not matter with this airplane. We have no real thrust angle other than a little bit of positive in it. But what we do want to make sure is that when we give this power, that this spins in the right direction to produce thrust. Also, when we mount this prop, we always want to make sure the numbers on the prop are pointing towards the nose. It's very easy to put a prop on backwards and have it produce thrust, but not enough, and it'll make a terrible noise. So in this case, I already have my screws in, making sure that I put the prop on the right direction. I need to have this spin clockwise, and when I wind this up, it does just that. If it's running backwards, all you need to do is take any 2 of the 3 bullet connectors and then swap them. So that's working good. Let's go ahead and power this down. And now that we know that the motor is running in the right direction, I can put my little back hatch on, right here. We've already glued our tab in on our hatch. And our next step here is we're gonna push this all the way forward, and we're just gonna let it make a very delicate little dent. Once we have our mark, I'm gonna take this, and I can even just take my multi-tool and kind of just put a little hole there and turn that little hole into a slot. Now when I press this down into place, it should line up with the tab and come all the way down right over top. And using an extra piece of our control horn wire, I'm just gonna make a little tiny cotter pin by bending this around all the way. And then straightening it out. Now that we made our cotter pin, we'll just line up the hole, press it on through. I just like to fold it in the back. That's gonna keep our hatch down with no problems, and it's not gonna pop off, but we can always access it and service it anytime we need. Now that we have our back hatch on, let's go ahead and put our attention towards the front nose. Now included with our kit is a piece of poster board, and you're gonna see 2 score lines here. Those 2 score lines are meant to bed along the bottom piece on the nose. Before we mount this, we're gonna wanna match the angles and cut off any excess foam so it follows the same plane. So I'm just gonna take my razor blade, I'm gonna match this right here, and then just a little bit of a sawing motion, I'm gonna delicately carve this to a smooth surface. Now, if you're flying FPV and maybe you're using an Insta360 Go, which fits perfectly right here, you're only gonna need to use the back section on the bottom. Or maybe you have a camera that you wanna mount on the bottom and not the top. You can configure this to any way you want to make sure that you can fit your camera gear and Insta360 Goes, or just completely seal it for a awesome line of sight experience. What I like to do is put my little caddis ant right on the top so it gets maximum airflow, and it sticks out with its antenna all the way up perfectly vertical. Now that we have our area trimmed, only a razor blade or a ruler right along the score line and just help it kind of get a better crease. There we go. And then we'll just fold it the other way on the back side. Once we made our fold, you'll see that everything kind of fits right along that nose really nicely. And we can take a bead of glue, and we'll start with the top half. And we'll set the top half into place. And then to let that dry, I'll just press that against the table. Once we've gotten the top half glued, we can open the bottom half like a door. And I'll place my glue around. And again, we'll take this down to the table and hold it into place. Once you've glued on your nose piece, take a pair of scissors or a razor blade and trace your perimeter. Now for the Millennium Flerken, if you want to put on the optional wingtip covers, now would be a great time to do that. All we simply need to do is sand our wingtips nice and flush so they're flat up against the table. After we have it sanded flush, we'll apply a bead of glue right around our wingtips, making sure that we don't glue our elevons in place as well. Then we simply place this down on the poster board. You have plenty of extra material, and we'll hold it there until the glue is thoroughly dry. Afterwards, you can come back with a pair of scissors or a razor blade and trim flush. A really quick, easy tip is to take a little bit of sandpaper and sand the edges of your poster board to get a nice, round, soft surface. Now that we have our nose section done and we have our electronics done, our last step is to establish the proper CG with the equipment we're going to carry in the airplane. Now this could be your FPV equipment, this could be your battery only, this could be a little FPV, something like the Insta360 Go, and your battery. You're going to want to make sure that you establish the proper center of gravity with whatever you plan on carrying. Also keep in mind, if you go from a 2-cell to a 3-cell, that battery is going to be located in a different location as well. The battery that I plan on using is this little tiny 800 milliamp 2-cell. This is not necessarily going to give us vertical, but it's going to be a very gentle flyer and a lot of fun and fly for a very long time. To keep this area protected and make sure that I can remove the battery and put it on many different times, I'm going to reinforce this area with some clear packing tape. For the clear packing tape, I like to go on both directions to make sure that the nose is also plenty strong, but also it's not going to peel up. You can do this on the top of the nose, on the bottom of the nose. The battery can basically go wherever you want as long as at the end it balances out properly. I already got my fuzzy on the back of the battery. I'm going to go ahead and put prickly on the plane. Keep in mind that this nose does add quite a bit of weight, so we want to install the nose before checking our center of gravity. There we go. The center of gravity is going to be roughly 1/4 of an inch ahead of the crease that you see right here. So when I hold my fingers up right basically in the center of this triangle, what we have is a slightly nose down attitude, and that's exactly what we want. Anytime you're flying with different batteries, whether it's a 2-cell or 3-cell, and you find out the perfect balance point, go ahead and trace that area with a marker and write down the milliamp and what the battery is. That way, whenever you change batteries, you'll instantly know exactly where to put it on. Our last step in this process is to install the prop, and then we're ready to head out to the field for its first maiden. All right, friends, we are ready to take the Nano Flerken up for its first maiden here. Now, the first maiden, I'm not going to have any gyros on. I'm not going to be activating the Aura 5. I want you guys to see how great this flies even without it. Now, one thing with any sub 250 gram plane, gyro stabilization is great because it takes out the effects of the wind, but you're going to see how smooth it flies. One of the biggest things I want to show you in this video is how easy these are to simply give it a wingtip launch. Also, if you haven't done so already, make sure your center of gravity is good, the weather is nice, and you're always launching in the wind. Also, before every first flight, we like to make sure that our up, down, left, and right is correctly moving in the right directions. If you followed along on our build video, we know that's already the case. All right, so for our maiden here, we're flying off of a 2-cell. We're gonna give this about 75% power. We're gonna hold this by the tip of the wing. And with our arms straight, we're gonna throw this, not like a boomerang, but we're gonna just simply let it track straight in the air, like we're just basically letting it go. And there we are. And this is with no gyros whatsoever. Now with 2-cell, you're gonna have a nice floaty flight experience. One thing you're gonna notice here is it's gonna be flying around 65% power, but it's gonna be very light on the wings and very easy to maneuver, even in sharp locations. If you guys have seen the release video of a classic Flerken, you'll see the flies just like it. Here's a little bit inverted. And let's put it into the wind and slow it down. And full up. Doesn't really stall on you, just gives you micro stalls. And you can see on 2-cell, it doesn't quite have vertical, but it can fly pretty decent around a 30-degree climb. All right, let's go ahead and throttle back here. She really glides well. There we are. Friends, I want to thank you for being part of the Flight Test family. Thank you for building along with the FT Nano Flerken with me. Also, make sure you hit that subscribe bell because we have lots of great update videos, lots of future build videos, and also quick tips. Also, when you build your FT Nano Flerken, please do us a favor, share your experience, share your build, and inspire others. We'll see you next time.